Hey everyone, there's a lot of really cool stuff on the table here. We're at Lian Li's offices in Taiwan, and the most interesting thing that we'll start with is gonna be that O11D EVO XL. Super mechanically interesting. There's a lot of features on this, like you can already see the rotated GPU on the side over here. So we'll come back to that. There's also a streamer 12-pin cable, so it's an RGB 12-pin that is currently, although it's a different product, hooked into a right angle adapter with a heatsink on it. So we'll come back to why that's interesting in a little bit. There's a interesting choice of daisy-chained radiators that's technically still an AIO, and also just a larger radiator with higher fin density for a single radiator design for the Galahad 2 cooler. So we're gonna be talking about all of that. Some of this is in more early prototyping stages, some of it's closer to being done, and all of it is new. So let's get started. Before that, this video is brought to you by Be Quiet and their Silent Wings 4 fans. The Silent Wings 4 fans market themselves as being useful on radiators, tower coolers, and cases alike. The fans have a 6-pole motor and use a fluid dynamic bearing, which helps with the noise profile and with longevity. The fans use anti-vibration mounts for reduced noise transfer to the case and have a rated lifespan of 300,000 hours. Learn more at the link in the description below. Okay, so we're gonna start with the case, and sorry for the echo, we don't have a solution for that. But the case is very interesting. So we recently talked about the LANCool 3, we've talked about the 216 as well, and with the LANCool 3 especially, one of the points we highlighted was Lian Li moving in this really mechanically inclined direction, where there's a lot of physical design elements, a particular obsession with magnets as well, but they're done in a way that's pretty functional. And in the LANCool 3, we thought, yeah, at times it's like, okay, it's a bit much, but actually really interesting overall as a case. And in the O11 EVO XL, that's right here, you get a lot of the same direction, except new execution of it. For the GPU right here, this is side mounted currently. You could still install it horizontally if you wanted to. It's vertically oriented. Couple things to point out thermally. So if you were gonna install a GPU like this yourself, you would definitely wanna take special care for the fan direction, where if you have a GPU that has a flow-through design like this Asus Strix does, where it's got the PCB cuts off here, the air flows through that way out the back, you would wanna make sure the fans aren't opposed. This is just a demo system, so there was no particular order for how they installed things, but you would want this fan to be going that way. The other thing to take note of though is with vapor chambers, they have certain orientations that are favored and certain that are unfavorable, that perform very poorly. And that's gonna depend kind of design to design, but it's something that NVIDIA talked about when their thermal engineer came out and met with us, if you wanna learn more about that. So you'll have to play around a little bit there. But for how it mounts, getting back to the mechanicals of it, there's this button right here. It's just a metal tab you push. So push that and pull on the fan, and it slides out. And this whole thing actually ends up socketing in. So you would build it outside of the case, similar to a radiator tray. So, I mean, actually really, really compactly put together. And we'll have a full review of the case in the future when it comes out, sometime middle of 2023. But this is how it assembles. There's a little bit of structural support here, and then the fans mount to the back side, so you can get some cooling assistance, pulling air through. Can I tilt this? Is it secure?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, don't worry. Yeah.
I'll drop the card. Okay, so fans on the backside there, riser cables routed through underneath, and then you can pull that through the case and obviously shove it into the motherboard. But pretty cool layout for this. You could always install it horizontally as well.
You can install it up, the other way around as well.
Oh yeah, do you want to show me that?
Yes.
So this is Jameson,
Hi.
CEO at Lian Li.
Hi. So in the original Evo, like the direction of the installation, it has to be always be mounted at the top. Whereas the Evo XL with the modification, so I think Steve just showed like the GPU being mounted the other way around. So right now I'm going to show it the other way. So right now the I/O, the GPU is facing up, whereas the other, for the beginning of the shot, it was facing down.
Right.
So as Steve was just mentioning, the vapor chamber theory of the GPU cooler. So that doesn't have to be worried with the XL because you can always switch wherever you want.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and then there's pins on the top here. There were pads on the bottom. That's for the fans. So that's not a case feature. That's a fan feature.
Fan feature. Yeah.
Yeah, and also in the way that Jameson just installed this, you can see here. I guess is this cage that's just to support. It's just a bracket to support the GPU.
Yes.
And then you would route the cables up and out.
Yeah. When you have the GPU mounted this way, the idea will be running the cable through the back and then route through here. But then if you have your GPU facing the other way around, so we will have the HDMI running through here. We still will have holes in here,
right,
to hold the cable in place. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's still under the design.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Thank you. For the other features here, so. This is kind of cool too, related to GPUs also, where this is very OEM style. Normally, depending on the execution in the past, the OEM like Dell, HP type clamps for add-in cards, I'd say about 80% of the time I've hated them. This one has a really strong clamping force to it, which there's a lot of resistance there. Feels pretty good. And it ends up being a screwless design for installing the GPU horizontally if you want to go that route. So kind of on the same area of mechanical features that are not strictly necessary, but are kind of cool on a high-end expensive case. This thing here it's already been installed by the team when they were demoing it, but this is the vertical GPU support, which in the past, we used to just make fun of these. But with cards this size now, not so funny. It's actually something that's useful at this point. So these screw in here, and for motherboard clearance with things like armor or something like that, we'd need to look at that separately. This board's pretty barren though around this area, so you just have a standoff that goes through a motherboard screw, standard location for ATX. The motherboard tray actually also adjusts vertically, so the 216 kind of does that. Adjustment, moving it up or down allows changing some, for example, fan support on the case, where you can go to two 120s in the back instead of a single 120, depending on where the motherboard is. If you move it down, gives some more clearance for installing. Power supply still mounts on the back compartment of the case. These two slots right here, those would socket in. This is the early sort of prototype CNC version of it, but it's gonna be one giant dust filter. The IO is movable as it was in the some of the previous cases Lian Li has done. So this can move up here as an alternative. Cable management here is massive. So there's some on the side for running the cables around and under, or you can run them all under over here. Did you say it was two 360s supported?
3420.
3420. So bottom,
side, and
top and side. Okay,
the reason why the grommet is so big is because the nature of this moving techniques.
Okay.
Yeah, so because the motherboard tray can move up and down, so it doesn't really make sense to have a rubber.
Cover.
Yes, exactly.
Right. Yeah. Let's go to the back. So some more mechanical stuff here. The drive cages they open and close now like this. So they've got a magnet in there that has a little bit of force, not strong enough to hurt your hard drive, but a little bit of force to hold it closed.
Hot swap.
Hot swap, yeah. Do you have the is there like a back plane for it? Like for the hot swap?
Yeah, they have a back plate whereas the cables that's being screwed onto the back. And then the cable will run through the back. Let me show you here. So basically the idea here. So as you can see, the cable run through here.
Oh yeah, okay, cool.
See? Yeah, the idea is we had the hot swap being pulled from the back.
Yeah.
But people are saying because their case is facing the wall, it's hard for them to actually grab the drive from the back. Right. They have to move the entire case.
SSDs installed to this central bar. They would install on the inside here, so when you close it, the black side shows. Okay, so in terms of cable management, this is kind of interesting too. First of all, gigantic hole for cable routing. This thing, it sounds like this is maybe not final yet.
Not final yet.
So here's where you can give Lian Li your opinion on this in the comments. They will probably actually read it because it's not too late to make changes here. So the thought process is possibly including 4 of these metal bars to help route the cables and hold them, rather than strictly doing the tie points like this with standard Velcro. So you might still get Velcro also, but then this thing just has these 2 rubber grommets basically that the screws go through, so some damping, vibration damping. And the screws end up just being standoffs to socket it in. So you see the standard sort of larger hole, smaller hole to socket it in. And it also means you could orient it, if you wanted to, vertically like this, and then you would slide it to the right. And that would give you a couple pathways. If you wanted different pathways, you could pull the cage out to route the cables underneath it, behind it, just like that. So pretty cool, a lot of space to work with. We'd have to test the thermals for a few different orientations on this one. But in terms of cable management, I guess, let Lian Li know. I think the simple question is just, would people find this useful? Is that the question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Was it like too complicated to actually, you have to DIY your own cable path?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, let Jameson know in the comments. And Jameson, I apologize. You're gonna have to read through some of the internet comments, but hopefully some of them will be useful.
Yeah, sure.
Is there much more to talk about back here?
Just one thing that's pretty obvious. So we have the fence that right now it's doable to mount on the side. So it's a standard 25 millimeter thick fan. So now it's available, right? We used to have, include the option for, like 80, 92. Right now it's a standard 120.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just to the back of the cage?
Yeah.
And interestingly here as well, if you're wondering, well, but where does the air go other than the drives? There's a lot of ventilation punched out in the back of the motherboard tray, so you would get some hitting the back of the board. Helps in a very small amount with VRM thermals, but not a whole lot. But it would allow you to pump some air through the hard drives, like this is the idea. Pretty cool, man. I was telling Jameson, I like the direction that Lian Li is going right now with some of this design, where there's some maybe unnecessary complexity at times, which is what the question about that cable management bar is about, but not in a way that seems pointless. So it's like there's still, all the features still have a function. The only question becomes, is it worth increasing the cost to make the case, and therefore the cost to buy the case? So that's the question remaining. But I think that covers the O11D EVO XL.
Yeah.
So pricing will be available in the future, and then release date sometime in the first half of 2023, most likely. All right, cool. So next one is gonna be the Galahad 2, early prototypes of it. This is what it looks like without we have some footage of it with the rest of the pump block housing, so we'll show that for what it looks like. But the radiator is actually the interesting part, which is weird, because normally the radiators are very copy-paste and pretty much the same from, so like Asetek, for example, uses functionally identical radiator supply for everybody, everyone who's a customer. But here, this is built in coordination with Appletech, which they make a large amount of the cooling solutions on the market, but as always, companies like Lian Li or NZXT, EVGA, whoever, whenever they input design to their supplier, that's when the product actually becomes what it is and different. So for the radiator here, first off, this dimension is longer, so we'll talk about that in a moment. It's a 120, you can do 120s on this, because this is a 360, except this particular dimension runs a little bit longer, and this dimension, so the thickness is deeper as well, which is one of the leading aspects of what has helped Arctic get such a strong foothold in the cooling market with its Liquid Freezer 2 series. Is actually the thickness of the radiator, not necessarily anything else, although their pump quality is pretty good too. Then the fin density here is also changed. So that is a little bit abnormal, where, well, some close-ups, but basically the typical channel for the fins is diced in half, but not by another tube. So these thicker ones, those are tubes that the water runs down, where you have tanks on the ends. There's a dividing wall in between on the tank, where you have the inlet and the outlet. And we have some old animated videos showing how these are built internally. So dividing wall, and then the water runs top to bottom in these tubes. But the smaller metal line, aluminum line cutting down the center, is what's dividing the fin stack in half and allowing an increase in the density. I have a rough number here, approximately a 45% increase over the previous Galahad. So that should help with giving some additional surface area to spread the heat over. And there's a little bit of change in static pressure requirement when you increase the thickness of the radiator, when you increase the fin density. So you need some stronger static pressure performance to force the air through as a result of that, but that is something that can be accommodated, especially because it's not crazy thick. I mean, I think this one, so they're running at 32 mil versus standard 28 millimeters previously. And I think Arctic is not too dissimilar than the 30s as well for theirs. We've seen some up to like 38 mil for thickness. For the width, this is running 130 millimeters in this dimension, as opposed to about 122 previously. It's running the same 12 tubes as normal down the center, and then the rest of it is really all in that fin design. So for sizes, these are gonna be in 240, 280, and 360. Currently no plans for a 420 millimeter size, and none for a 120 mil either. The fittings on the end are a little different as well. So typically the pump block does have that rotational fitting that you see here, where you can spin it so that you can actually install it in the angle orientation you want. But up here, it is typically just comes out straight, or at most you might get like a bend. But they have a 65-degree angle on these, and then also a rotational fitting, so you can get a little bit more flexibility in how you lay out the radiator. The channel for how the water enters is a little different this time, but we're gonna show that when we do the review of the Galahad 2, which is this one. So we'll save that for later, but the micro fins are similar to before, where you have really high fin density for an AIO. And this is for the pump, so very large. This is kind of interesting. This is maybe one of the only things on this table where I'm really not sure I personally see myself ever wanting to use it. I understand the goal, but I think it's really hard to execute this idea cleanly. So if anyone has constructive feedback for Lian Li, this would be the time to post it in the comments, because they're still playing around with this. But this is an AIO version of an open loop, where you've seen QDC loops before, like EK has sold a lot of them, like the Phoenix line and whatever the other one is that they discontinued because it was like blowing up and erupting and leaking. But this is a random EK slam. This is a closed loop, just connected via tubes between two radiators, identical. And then I guess it's going to be a Galahad series cooler as well. It's just, this seems like kind of difficult to install with a wide compatibility docket between cases. If it's designed just for like Lian Li cases, then maybe it could be cleaner, but then you limit yourself on compatibility outside of that. So I don't know. There's not really a great, like, widely compatible version of this without going to open loop. However, the idea is Lian Li is trying to solve for the fact that modern CPUs are now consuming enough power where you can get benefit out of having two 360s connected, and it's not just to no end. So that's the goal, where you have these 250, like 242 watt Intel 13900K or something. You'd actually get utilization out of two radiators. It's just the size problem. So this is something that they're playing around with, but you can post your feedback in the comments below. And now we're gonna move into some of the fans and the 12-pin connectors. Okay, so for the 12 volt high power stuff, so this is just an RGB cable. They've done streamer cables before, and this is another one of those with 12 volt high power. There are some differences though, outside of just the LEDs, and one of them, this is a prototype, that's why it's like missing a terminal and it's not finalized coloring. But one of the changes that Lian Li is making is custom tooling the actual connector at the end. So we're gonna talk more about that, but they've gone kind of an NTK style with the, typically is referred to as a tulip clamp. So the terminals in the end, they either use these tiny bumps that we have microscope shots of from our 12 volt high power piece. You have tiny bumps where the pin contacts those bumps as you socket the connector, or it uses a tulip clamp where the clamp comes in sort of towards each other at the end, the two sides of the terminal, to give some force on that pin and make good contact. So those are your typical options. Lian Li is going more for the tulip style one, which is that NTK one. We did not find any particular benefit, Astron versus NTK, in terms of the style of the terminal when we did our testing. but Lian Li believes that the tulip style is the better one. So that's what they're going to use for their custom version of the 12 pin on this, the connector side. For other solutions though, so materials, or actually let's talk about the thickness here. So the terminal, the exterior of the terminal where you have that sort of almost double C, like bracketed design, that metal typically is around 0.2 millimeters. Lian Li is going for a 0.25 millimeter thickness for that metal in the terminal bracket, which should be beneficial in theory, should maybe give you a little bit more of a solid connection between them, which is what people need at the moment to make sure they're plugging it in correctly. There's no meaningful change to the way it's actually clipping. So we've talked to a few people out here in Taiwan about, hey, are you going to introduce a new clip style that's maybe a little more mechanically clear when it snaps into place? And so far, no one has done something new for that. That's something PCI SIG is talking about. This 90 degree, it's a separate product from this, so you could use them together, but they're not meant to be sold together. This is a fin stack, so this one's not painted black yet. These are all prototypes, to be very clear about that. So fin stack on the top, which contacts to, you can see it here, a thermal pad. Thermal pad goes to the PCB, which goes to an MCU, so there's a microcontroller on there. The microcontroller is kind of interesting because you're sending a lot of power across this board right here just to turn it 90 degrees. But what it's looking at is the temperature of the MCU and the PCB, and therefore kind of the connector, but indirectly. And if it hits a certain trigger threshold, then it'll cut power, it'll shut down, which is supposed to be a safety switch for some of those 12-volt high power issues that we talked about over the last couple months now. As for what exactly that temperature should be, that's a little more challenging because the connector on the 12-volt high power thing, if you thermal camera it, it's like 60 to 65 is where it typically is, but then it starts to really run away fast as soon as you hit 70. Problem is, if you have the temperature too low for the shutdown on the MCU, then you risk accidentally shutting it down when it's otherwise completely safe, just because maybe the ambient temperature is high in the case, or because you have a GPU like this, maybe it's exhausting its hot air straight into the 90 degrees. So they have to run the shutdown temperature a little on the higher side to make sure it doesn't just turn off unnecessarily, which is sort of the opposite end of the safety protection. So that's the 90 degree. There's gonna be a black and a white version of it. The final versions will change some of the coloring and things. It'll look cleaner in the plastic housing. It changes to the color on the connector itself. And then these actually don't even have, I don't think, terminals and pins in them right now, so that's not final yet. But those are some of the changes they're making. For the wire gauge on the streamer, this is going to be a 16 gauge wire for the actual power line, which is what this is right here. It has a strain relief molded into plastic at the ends of the cable where the connector is, which prevents bending at the most critical spot of the cable. And then for contact, it's soldered, not crimped, so they're soldering in. And we have some pretty cool shots in software of the interior design and assembly of this that we'll show on the screen as well to give you an idea. Jameson, what was the material? LCP? Is that red material?
Liquid crystal polymer.
Yeah, so the liquid crystal polymer,
yeah.
Which is supposed to be more thermally resistant. I am not personally familiar with it, but that's what they're using for the red material that you'll see in the screenshot on the screen. Now for the fans, Lian Li has done Unifans for a couple years now. We've shown them since one of the CES prototypes. This is the newer Unifan where they slide apart like that and then connect together these pin to pad contacts for power daisy chain down the fan line. You see there's another one here if you want to do another. There's another one over here, which just is cable clutter elimination. So this has already been announced and shown. We won't really spend any time on it, but they're still making the Unifans. They still have the same snap together functionality. It is improved with the newer version. However, the AIOs, the liquid coolers, since they come with fans, as basically all AIOs do, you end up in the conundrum of if you want Unifans on those for the side lighting, side RGB lighting, you basically needed to buy a different fan to upfit it because the one that comes on it is not as complete. But Lian Li is looking at selling packs of these add-ons, which I think it's going to be roughly $15 for 3 of them.
Yeah,
is the theoretical pricing right now. And these snap onto the fan. Jameson, I'm gonna request your assistance in demoing.
I'm going to use the white one. So usually the fan will have its side plate. So the side plate can be removed. Once it's removed and you wanted to use the side RGB kit, it's simply just clip on. Okay.
Right, and then you can do that on two sides if you wanted to.
Yeah. So the cable, it's also a quick connect cable. So once you plug in, the lights will turn on. Yeah.
Right. There you go. Cool. So that would be your upfit solution if you had the fans on the AIO, but you didn't want to just like toss them or throw them somewhere else in the case, and you didn't necessarily want to invest in like the full Unifan.
Yeah. Also, the idea here is because the materials we use for if you want a blade to be illuminated, usually the material is either PC or ABS. So that material will be not as hard as for example, like LCP, PPS, or PBT. So we want harder materials on the impeller, so that will generate a better performance.
Right. Yeah, that should also help with things like reduction of vibration across the blade.
Yeah.
And it also helps with keeping shape of the blade as, you want the blade as close to the inner wall. These are like super close, by the way. You want the blade as close to the inner wall of the fan as you can for best performance. But then the risk with that is over time as it ages, there's a chance that the blade clips the inner wall. If you use the right materials, it's not a problem. If you build it like Enermax built their fans they had for the reverse dust marketing bullshit. Sorry, I'm not trying to get Jameson on camera for my rants about Enermax. Then what'll happen is the blade will dig into the inner wall and it eventually stops. So the material that he's talking about is pretty important actually for the fan blade. Cool. So I think that covers everything on the table as much as I can remember it. And Jameson, thank you for joining as well for some of the assistance. Subscribe for more as always. Go to patreon.com/gamersnexus or store.gamersnexus.net to help us out directly. And check back for when we have the full review of the case, because this I really want to work on. Patrick will do all of the analysis on it as always in the lab, but it's still a little ways out. Thanks for watching. We'll see you all next time.